The film cameras stopped rolling, and 8 crew members watched as Keanu Reeves was learning kung fu when the master told him that 4 months don't make real martial artist, during an intense Matrix training session that would challenge his understanding of authentic martial arts mastery versus accelerated film preparation. Warner Brothers Soundstage 12, Chicago set, February 1999. The Matrix production facility occupies a converted warehouse space where revolutionary filmmaking meets traditional martial arts, where authentic combat discipline determines character credibility more than entertainment industry scheduling or accelerated training protocols that reduce centuries-old fighting systems to crash course preparation designed for dramatic effectiveness rather than understanding martial arts as lifelong spiritual discipline. The set embodies Matrix's futuristic vision, green screen backgrounds that create digital reality illusions, sophisticated wire rigs that enable gravity-defying stunts, computer monitors displaying code sequences that serve as visual metaphors for reality perception requiring sustained philosophical engagement rather than surface comprehension serving entertainment purposes. Keanu Reeves, 34 years old, adjusts his iconic black Neo costume while processing martial arts combinations that challenge conventional actor preparation through traditional frameworks extending beyond Matrix choreography toward authentic kung fu that serious martial disciplines demand from practitioners whose credibility must span spiritual commitment rather than relying solely on physical memorization. His preparation includes 4 months of intensive training with Hollywood's top fight coordinators, wire work specialists who emphasize visual spectacle, stunt professionals whose expertise serves dramatic sequences while revealing traditional gaps in fundamental martial arts principles that prioritize warrior consciousness over functional movement designed for entertainment effectiveness. This sequence requires integrating traditional forms with wire work, Keanu observes while struggling with complex combination, noting the technical demands that balance authentic martial movement with Matrix's revolutionary cinematography extending beyond conventional action toward philosophical expression that few science fiction films attempt through sustained martial authenticity. Different kind of performance challenge than traditional fight choreography, he continues, recognizing the parallel between authentic kung fu discipline and entertainment martial arts that prioritizes visual impact over spiritual truth requiring sustained commitment to warrior consciousness and philosophical understanding that most accelerated training never addresses comprehensively. His training begins with appreciation for martial arts culture that operates independently of entertainment industry schedules, seeking authentic combat education that serves character development rather than maintaining production timelines through abbreviated preparation that generates dramatic success without advancing spiritual understanding or traditional knowledge. The production attracts established martial artists whose combat commitment reflects deep engagement with traditional systems rather than accelerated training based on film requirements. Masters who understand spiritual demands while recognizing mental discipline that serves both physical technique and philosophical recognition requiring sustained traditional development. The training environment includes wire work coordinators whose technical expertise enables Matrix's revolutionary sequences, fight choreographers whose knowledge spans entertainment and traditional combat, meditation teachers whose understanding of warrior psychology provides foundation for spiritual development that transcends physical capability toward authentic martial consciousness. Most actors who attempt martial arts for films want impressive sequences within production schedules rather than developing actual warrior discipline, explains Master Chen, whose own kung fu experience encompasses decades of traditional training in spiritual discipline. They approach combat through accelerated memorization rather than recognizing spiritual requirements that define authentic martial arts and warrior consciousness. As training progresses, Keanu demonstrates respectful engagement with traditional concepts and spiritual complexity, recognizing martial authenticity that extends beyond his current knowledge while avoiding abbreviated approaches that treat kung fu like enhanced stunt training rather than understanding combat as spiritual practice requiring sustained philosophical development. The production's reputation attracts legitimate martial arts community members whose traditional authority creates evaluation standards for distinguishing genuine spiritual engagement from entertainment appropriation that treats combat like performance enhancement rather than understanding martial arts as cultural discipline requiring sustained spiritual commitment. From his position demonstrating traditional forms, Master Lu observes Keanu's martial attempts with growing understanding of spiritual requirements that distinguish Kung Fu from functional choreography toward warrior development requiring practitioner whose authenticity spans physical technique and traditional wisdom that few film-trained performers successfully integrate. Lu represents authentic martial authority, combat expertise earned through decades of traditional training and spiritual discipline, Kung Fu knowledge developed through studying ancient fighting systems, cultural integrity that prioritizes authentic development over production accommodation that might compromise martial vision for entertainment schedules or dramatic effectiveness. He watches Keanu's form execution with practiced assessment earned through distinguishing genuine martial engagement from accelerated limitation that film training might create through emphasis on memorization over understanding, recognizing movement patterns that reveal preparation approaches unsuited for traditional consciousness. The martial framework requires understanding combat as spiritual discipline rather than choreographed sequence, technique as philosophical expression rather than memorized pattern, training as consciousness development rather than skill acquisition, mastery as traditional awakening rather than performance achievement, concepts that challenge accelerated film preparation. As demonstration continues, Keanu shows growing appreciation for traditional concepts while revealing combat approaches that emphasize memorized sequences and visual execution rather than engaging spiritual frameworks that inform Kung Fu through warrior consciousness requiring sustained philosophical commitment beyond production schedules. His attempts focus on replicating techniques correctly for camera rather than expressing traditional content through movement, approaching martial arts through accelerated precision rather than spiritual flow that requires understanding combat as philosophical conversation between practitioner and traditional intent rather than choreographed demonstration. 6 seconds pass as Lu evaluates Keanu's martial engagement and apparent limitation in accessing traditional expression that Kung Fu requires from practitioners whose warrior authenticity must support spiritual communication rather than reducing combat to memorized sequences serving entertainment purposes. 4 months don't make real martial artist, Lu declares with devastating precision earned through distinguishing authentic warrior discipline from accelerated film training that treats Kung Fu like enhanced choreography rather than recognizing traditional work requiring sustained spiritual commitment and warrior consciousness beyond production capability. His assessment exposes fundamental requirement that prioritizes spiritual authenticity over accelerated competency for martial expression that serves as traditional communication rather than entertainment demonstration, recognizing Kung Fu expectations for spiritual credibility that requires practitioner whose philosophical understanding supports cultural preservation rather than production accommodation. The declaration carries particular significance because Matrix represents philosophical breakthrough that demands performer whose traditional engagement supports warrior culture rather than reducing martial complexity to accelerated application that might compromise spiritual vision for production accommodation or entertainment effectiveness. Crew members respond with understanding of traditional factors that influence martial development beyond production considerations, recognizing authentic warrior success that depends on practitioner capability whose spiritual authenticity supports cultural expression that accelerated preparation might not provide without corresponding philosophical engagement. Keanu's face shows recognition of evaluation criteria that prioritizes traditional expression over accelerated capability, his film training conflicting with martial requirements that warrior discipline demands from practitioners rather than accepting memorized interpretation as substitute for spiritual understanding and philosophical commitment. But before Keanu can respond with arguments about his intensive preparation or defend his training approach through accelerated dedication and sustained physical regimens, he demonstrates understanding that acknowledges traditional requirements while respecting warrior expertise requiring philosophical engagement rather than memorized performance. Master Lu, Keanu says respectfully, his voice carrying genuine recognition of martial authority rather than defensive performer pride, "You're absolutely right about 4 months versus real martial arts. I need to understand that authentic kung fu requires years of spiritual discipline that can't be compressed into production schedules." Liu appreciates Keanu's immediate understanding of traditional demands and willingness to accept warrior requirements rather than defending accelerated preparation that might not serve martial concepts despite genuine commitment to combat excellence through intensive film training and professional coordination. Keanu continues with growing recognition of traditional authority. "When you say 4 months don't make martial artist, you're addressing the reality that warrior consciousness and spiritual development can't be rushed for entertainment purposes, even with the most intensive preparation." The acknowledgement demonstrates Keanu's understanding that martial authenticity requires serving traditional wisdom rather than adapting ancient concepts to accommodate production schedules, recognizing cultural reality that influences warrior development beyond personal dedication or film industry requirements. Liu recognizes Keanu's humility and willingness to accept traditional limitations, his expression shifting as he appreciates respectful acceptance of cultural truth rather than defensive positioning that might compromise collaborative development of authentic martial expression within production constraints. The training continues with revised expectations that honor traditional requirements while serving Matrix's revolutionary vision, demonstrating collaborative development that balances cultural authenticity with production capability rather than compromising martial standards or abandoning spiritual integrity for entertainment effectiveness. The film industry observes with understanding as traditional martial arts demonstrates complex integration process that balances cultural authenticity with production requirements, recognizing master authority that prioritizes spiritual truth over production accommodation despite genuine commitment to combat excellence through accelerated techniques. Years later, Keanu speaks about Matrix Kung Fu training as educational about martial requirements, traditional authenticity, and spiritual development that serves cultural preservation rather than accommodating production approaches despite sincere commitment to combat excellence and intensive preparation beyond conventional film standards. Liu occasionally references that Matrix session as example of how martial education requires traditional engagement when practitioners choose cultural learning over accelerated assumption and spiritual respect over training that treats Kung Fu community like entertainment resource rather than understanding martial arts as spiritual discipline requiring sustained traditional commitment. 6 Seconds on Matrix set in 1999. One moment when accelerated preparation met traditional requirements before spiritual understanding enabled appropriate martial respect. One choice that honored cultural wisdom rather than production accommodation and proved that authentic Kung Fu requires traditional consciousness and spiritual commitment rather than intensive training alone. The session that showed genuine martial arts demands traditional authenticity and spiritual development that can't be compressed through accelerated training or production schedules alone, because authentic Kung Fu community depends on philosophical understanding and cultural consciousness that film industry success doesn't automatically provide despite professional preparation designed for dramatic effectiveness rather than traditional development and spiritual awakening.